Welcome back to Team O'Neill. I'm Chris. I'm joined here in Atlanta, Georgia with the SimCraft guys. And we really wanted to talk with you guys about what you need to know when you're buying a sim unit, right? So one of the things that I didn't really understand when I came here was what are the important components of a simulator when you're trying to purchase one. And I've looked at the basic, what I can find on Amazon and what you can buy off the shelf. And now that we've spent some time in your guys' units, I have a little better understanding, but I want to spend some time talking with you guys about what do we need to think about if you're gonna buy a sim unit.
Sure.
Right, and so one of our other videos we talked about what you do here in the center axis and how a sim works, but when you think about buying a sim, Sean, what do you kind of think about as far as like the questions we should ask?
Well, a self-serving answer would be start with motion, but we'll go to everything else because we've talked about our technology quite a bit. Okay. There are a few categories of things to consider. Obviously, you're going to need a seat, a place to sit, and a chassis to mount your stuff onto. There are a number of available static chassis on the market. Varying levels of adjustability and rigidity would generally be their specifications that are important. How many different components do they support? What's the adjustability for positioning? It's kind of the first thing you might want to look at. And after you've decided on a chassis that works for you, sometimes it'll come with a seat, sometimes it won't. Comfort is a huge part of this, right? You plan to spend a lot of time in the seat. You don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want your rear end aching after a half hour in the seat. So you got to find something that you like that's comfortable. If it's not, make some adjustments, put some cushions in there, find a solution that you can sit in for a couple hours with some focused time to practice. After that, it's about your controls. At a minimum, you're going to need a steering wheel and pedals. Most of us, probably you as well, Matthew, started with a Logitech force feedback wheel. Back in the day, it was a G25. Actually, before that, it was the Momo. It was a $99, very basic force feedback wheel with two pedals, and it works. Right. We talked a little earlier about the importance of your position to your controls, and also the mechanics of your feet and your arms and hands and wrists. You want to get as close as you can. I wouldn't, labor over that too long. You're only going to get to a close-ish approximation of what you're going to be experiencing in the car, because one thing will actually throw it off. For instance, the diameter of the wheel itself might be different on your force feedback wheel than it will be in your real car. And you can labor over that and try to fix that and figure it out. To some people that might be important, but I don't think it's necessarily that important that you have an exact replica wheel, at least as a starting point, right? And that's what we're talking about here, is getting into this, right? Pedals, most of the pedal sets that you'll find that are included with the lower entry steering wheels are functional, period. They're not that great. Right. They aren't going to provide good feedback in the pedal. They will also be, let's say your feet and your action of your feet will not be like pushing pedals of a car. They will get you by, but just setting expectations here, they're not going to be a great solution if you're buying a pedal set that's bundled with a steering wheel in most cases. And there are a number of companies on the market that sell specifically pedals. We've actually sold pedals historically over the years as a component for sim builders that want to pay specific attention and spend some money on a proper pedal set. We sold a lot of them during the pandemic. We've kind of pulled back on that quite a bit as a focus for our business, building complete systems. However, that is an option, is to look at a pedal set that's specifically designed to be a pedal set representing a race car, and the actions of the pedals similar in terms of pressure, distance of the pedal you're traveling, and then of course the action of your feet on the pedals. But if you get into that level of thinking about it, you have to start with, are your pedals hinging from the bottom or are they hinging from the top? And that's a consideration too. So all of the pedals that you'll get kind of entry level will be bottom hinge pedals.
Right.
If you're driving a car, a rally car, I think a lot of times has a top hinge pedal.
Right.
There aren't that many on the market that are available. And the reason for that is integration into the cockpit.
Right.
Because they have to hang up here
Right.
above where your feet are.
Right.
And it's just weird and awkward to make something not only mount correctly, but also be rigid.
Right.
So when you stab on the brake pedal, it's not going to flex your chassis.
Right.
And so actually, if you go back in history, there were some companies that were, sort of early in this space that were building top hinge pedals, but they seem to have dried up and disappeared. And I can't name one off the top of my head right now. Maybe you can. We do build a top hinge pedal set. We've built a couple of them bespoke. Of course, they're mounted in our cockpit, which is very rigid, and we've been able to figure that out. But for the starters, you probably just want to start with the pedals you're going to get with a low entry wheel and then kind of continue to iterate up. That's one of the great things about this hobby or this effort of sim racing is you can always make improvements and buy a component and make an improvement here and buy a component and make an improvement there. So once you get that far, of course, you'll have to shift the car, and there are some options for commercially available off-the-shelf shifters.
Yep.
Once again, back to Logitech, they have a shifter option, and I believe it's bundled with their pedals and their wheel. It's like a complete system, complete system for controls. Expectations should be minimal in terms of performance, and that the shifter is working and feeling like your shifter in your car. It'll give you some value, but it's not going to be a replication of what you would experience in your car by any means. There, once again, are some options on the market where you can upgrade specifically the shifter, and you can attain higher levels of fidelity with that one specific component if that's important to your development and your training.
Yeah.
From there, it's audio, visual, PC, and software. Pretty basic. You can get away with just a headset. You don't need to buy a speaker set. Headset will allow you to do it in the morning, late at night, and you're not disrupting anybody in the home. Visuals, you can start with a single screen and go up to a triple screen if you prefer. I would encourage people to try VR. I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy a VR system because it may not work for you. But VR is a great option for short-term use, 45 minutes to an hour max. Very immersive, head tracking, you move around just like you're in the cockpit. It's great to see where that technology is and is going.
Right.
It's just going to continue to get better. And then, your system that's running this whole thing can be either, if you're going to go triple screen, you're going to need a desktop PC with a proper graphics card and the ability to run 3 separate video outputs from your video card to run the triple screen setup. The screens themselves are really going to be limited by the mount that you can get for your setup. So if you buy a commercially available off-the-shelf rig or sled, and there's lots of names for these static cockpits, some of them offer a triple screen mount that's modular, and it's sort of an add-on to the cockpit. But that mount will be limited by its own design in terms of how big the screens can be that you're mounting on it, and whether or not it would actually accommodate curved screens. Curved screens is a newer thing in graphic tech. The last 5 or 6 years we've seen them. We've seen and worked with 32-inch curves that have basically a less aggressive radius to them. And then we've also worked with a 50-inch Samsung Arc monitor, which has a much more aggressive curve to it, so much so that I think it's a 1 meter radius. So if you're sitting in the center of the cockpit, and we did it on a 6 for a client, 1 meter over here, you have a screen that curves perfectly around you, exactly 1 meter from the center of your head. So like the radius of the screens was really quite nice. So that's sort of taking it to a very high level. I mean, those are expensive screens, but you can do it if you choose. If you're going to go single screen in VR, you can actually run really good graphics off of a modern gaming laptop. We actually leverage laptops in one of our packages, what we call a sport package. It gets you everything you need to have a sim. It's not the best of everything. It's sort of, this is everything you need, and it works great, but it's limited, right? You can't run triple screens off a laptop. So if you want triple screens, forget the laptop idea. Laptop is good for a single screen and VR only. And we use MSI laptops. We have no official affiliation with MSI, but they make a lot of good laptops that are high quality and have been reliable for us and our clients. And so, there's plenty of options to look at there. And last but not least is the software you're running your sim. And we've worked with iRacing since 2008. It's a great platform for rallying. They do have a rallycross component to their sim. But it may only be a partial solution for a rally enthusiast who's really trying to get a lot of different environments that you might encounter at the various rallies that you guys have.
Makes sense. No, I appreciate that. So one of the things I think for me that I've experienced with you is what questions to ask when I'm getting into a sim unit, right? So do I want motion? Am I solving?
Let's stop there real quick, because that's a really important question.
Right. Am I trying to get
and I'm trying
a
to answer
sim or
this.
a game?
Well, I'm trying to answer this question without sounding self-serving. Okay.
Right.
So back in 2005, when I first started working on SimCraft, my personal definition of a sim had motion.
Right.
It's like, if it moves, then it's a sim. Like that's just me. That's my personal opinion. Everyone. That's just the way I felt. Okay. It's not necessarily true. It's just an opinion.
It's your definition.
That's my definition. As we've developed our technology for motion, we have observed and experienced other motion solutions, other ways to move either a seat or a cockpit. And, I'm happy for anybody that can use a technology that isn't SimCraft, that they feel they're getting value out of. If you enjoy it, great. But if you are trying to replicate a car environment, I would subscribe to the idea that if your sim doesn't move like a car, then don't expect it to help you learn. It might be fun, it might be engaging, it might be something that's satisfies your need for moving around. But ultimately, there's kind of two options that you're gonna be looking at or seeing out there in the market. There's gonna be what we call a seat mover. It literally just moves the seat, two actuators behind the seat, and your controls are stationary. Your visuals are stationary, and drive them. Personally, I can't immerse in the sim because the seat doesn't move around in a car. And so we try not to introduce things in the environment that aren't true of the real thing. That's sort of our test. Every time we have a new idea for something, if we can ask ourselves, is this present in the real thing? And the answer is no, we don't do it. Like one example of this would be belt tensioners. You're gonna see these out there too. Belt tensioners are something that people are putting on their sims. If you like them, great, we're happy for you. But for us, your belts never tension in a car. You thrust into your belts, right? You might even stretch your belts, but they're never sucking you into the seat. And so for us, it doesn't pass the test. We don't do it. But it might work for you. You might find that to be fun and additive. The other motion solution you might find out there is the D-box approach. And there's a couple companies that kind of take this approach. Anytime an actuator is underneath the cockpit and moving the cockpit around, generally, I'm thinking 100% of the cases I've seen, the visuals are stationary. The cockpit moves a little bit. Range of motion is very limited.
Okay.
Degrees of freedom are linked and synchronized. They're not independent from each other. So I think the plus for that approach is you're at least moving the whole cockpit. right? So if you are moving, your cockpit's moving together. The negatives are your visuals are static, and the fidelity you can get from this approach is going to be limited for a number of reasons. We won't get into that right now. Go drive it. Go drive it, see if you like it, and if you think it'll help you, then great, we're happy for you. But ultimately,
I think, if you don't mind me cutting
No,
in,
not at all.
I think one of the things is what questions to ask. So am I just gaming? Am I trying to train, right? And that's where I think a lot of the stuff that I've learned from you already is there's a way to just have fun and play a video game, as long as we're realistic with ourselves of like the goal is to have a unit that is just a steering wheel and I'm better at playing Gran Turismo or whatever game on a system. Whereas what you guys have done with SimCraft is create training tools, right? And so that's a question that I really wasn't asking myself when I first got here was, do I want a training tool in my sim unit, right? And that's, I think, a bit of the software problem, right? The software is gamey and a lot of it isn't true sim software. iRacing being probably one of the only exceptions, really. And so your equipment is kind of paired with that software appropriately. So that's one of the things I think people need to ask yourself. Are you really trying to create a training tool, or are you trying to create a video game?
Right.
And then a price point problem too, right? Like, what do you have, a few $100? Do you have a few $1,000? Do you have a much bigger budget?
Well, and I think a lot of people are also afraid, I think legitimately so, considering putting myself back in 2003 or so before I knew anything about Sims. It's a little bit of concern about the daunting task of learning about all these components and setting them up correctly, mounting them properly, getting them wired, getting them configured. And so that's not trivial. That's stuff that you learn. Now, here's the good news. There's a community that loves to help people. You can do your own research. There is a Google machine where you can type in what you're looking for and get results. Results vary. But ultimately, you can't, if you want to help yourself to information, it's there for the taking. And then you have to make your own decisions based on what you read. But I think anybody with an average skill set can figure this out. This is not anything super hard. It seems daunting because you don't know a lot.
It's like an IKEA set, right? It's a little harder than Legos. IKEA, you're not quite sure all the components, and you got to be a little creative.
The instructions are probably terrible.
Right, exactly. That's kind of what I feel like. I went on Amazon before I came down here and tried to spend the most money I could building a sim, right? And so put all the components in my cart, and I was overwhelmed, like, because then I'd have to be able to put it together, right? Like a frame and the steering wheel and the shifter, and I think I got up to $3,000 or $4,000 that I could spend on just on Amazon.com.
That was without a PC.
Right, without a PC, and just to hopefully hook it up to an Xbox or a PlayStation or something. Ideally, it was my concept, because I just wanted to do some research before I came down here. But I think probably the biggest thing I was afraid of was hitting buy because of just putting that together. And that's fairly simple, right? And I think what you guys have done with SimCraft is you've solved a lot of those problems. Obviously, it's a price point too that you've been able to do that, but then you also went way beyond just the technology and built your own systems, built your own built your own hardware to be able to make sure that you maximize the programs that are available. For the real world, for you, I think a lot that you've been able to help me understand is actually using this technology, actually racing and training. And what do you see, or what have you heard from people asking you questions on, should I buy a SimCraft unit? Like, what have you heard out in the market?
Well, I'm extremely biased,
Obviously.
so let's start there, because I did start as a customer.
And spoiled.
Yeah, spoiled for sure. But I did start as a customer.
Right.
So my entry into the world that we live in today was all about driver development.
Right.
And as we've continued to push the company forward and offer different products within the environment, I'd always recommend our motion specifically. The most important cueing and motion that is necessary for a driver development scenario would be a yaw and pitch equation, and that's where we start.
Right.
So there may be people that have purchased a lot of equipment that Sean's already talked about. We sell base chassis that they can reuse their equipment and put it on our motion chassis. That's a good starting point for people that want to experience the next level for driver development. So you can start with a 2 degree of freedom unit, put your own components on there, or purchase a unit that is built by us with our specific level of components, and then start where you're comfortable. You know, that still may be a jump for most people, but the jump is important if you're after driver development. And this is where a lot of our influences around us with the sports scientists and the pro drivers, this is all feedback that we receive from the community that is after immersion, they're after the realism, they're after translational seat time. You can get the majority of that with yaw and pitch. Learning the car control tools, and especially in a rallycross scenario where the car is yawing at an extreme degree. And knowing how to finesse the vehicle with not only throttle and brake modulation, but also counter steering can only be done with a scenario that mimics that. So it's super important to start where you're comfortable, whether it is reusing some of the components that you've already purchased, putting them on our motion chassis of yaw and pitch, and then eventually adding more of the degrees of freedom over time. That's entirely up to you. But I think the benefit that our customers, when they talk to us, understand is that we're not going to sell you something to get you in over your head. We're getting you at a level that you feel comfortable at, and then most people take the next step and add more motion as they go along, and then some just decide to go all in. That's entirely up to them. But driver development needs yaw and pitch. Start there and decide what you want to do next.
And some people, if they are gaming, they just want that a solution as well, right? Like maybe their goal isn't to be the best race car driver. They just want to have the nicest tool that can do the job. And obviously your Apex 6 product can do that. Something for me too, as thinking about development and training, you know, I want to get in seat time in the real world and get as much time in my real race car. But, you know, thinking about that investment between my crew, my tires, my fuel, you know, when I start to think about that cost, and I start to look at the cost of what a unit really does cost, it could start to justify itself fairly quickly, right? Ultimately, and that's kind of the thing. It kind of is a little bit of sticker shock maybe for some people at first, but also if you do have a race car and you realize the real expense of that, you know, one thing I think you guys said, which was really cool, is even your energy consumption is really low. So, you know, buying your unit, I would also think my energy costs are going to go way up, but you know, that's something you guys really took into consideration when you were building this system.
For sure.
You have 2 units, one platform's a little smaller if you don't have as much space. Like, you guys really spent the time to think about the end user side of it, right? Like, what it's going to be like in your house, what it's going to be like, and it's something that these are questions you need to ask if you're thinking about buying a unit. What is all these things going to and you guys are willing to answer all the questions, and you don't want to put somebody in your product if it's not a good fit, right?
That's right.
Ultimately, so.
The thought process I went, as I rewind and go through the buying process, I drove every piece of equipment I could. I wanted to understand what felt real, what didn't feel real. And my thought process, especially spending, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 grand a weekend, you know, which is on the low end. That's on the low end. You know, and some people may not be spending that amount of money. They may be, you know, spending a lot less, but they want to maximize their solo track day experiences, or maybe they're going wheel-to-wheel racing. But my thought process when I was going through this buying scenario was, I can go spend 2, 3 weekends or 4 weekends worth of entertainment, because that's what I was racing for at the time, just entertainment. Or I could race for the rest of my life, in theory. With a proper physics-based simulation solution that gives me the same exact exhilaration. It gives me very true-to-life feedback, and I made that decision by analyzing it from that perspective. When you go tire cost and fuel cost and crew cost and transportation, and you add these things up, it's way more than what you could purchase an unlimited seat time solution for, regardless if it's 2 degrees of freedom, 4 or 6. You're putting yourself in a scenario where you have a good amount of seat time at a fixed cost.
Which is
never
happened in racing. Right. So ultimately, too, the rally school, our 5-day rally school, $7,500, but to get in 4 different vehicle types and to race all day for 5 days straight for 8 hours and tire and fuel. there's no way you could do it for $7,500, right? That's
Right.
kind of part of our justification for
Yep.
the rally school and our clients. And I think most realistic people understand that what we do is expensive, right?
Yep.
But ultimately, we're trying to provide a good value, and that's something where we did overbuild our school. You overbuilt your system to ensure that longevity and that
Absolutely.
investment. And that's something where I think our partnership makes sense, and it's something that we've been working together for a long time.
Yeah.
The reason we started working together was the military had a horrible tire model for loose surface tire on dirt and gravel for their simulators, because they were doing third world scenario training, prepping to go on missions, and their technology that they had wasn't good for any time they went on dirt. So we've been working together since 2007,
Yep.
2008,
Yep.
and it's something that we've been passionate about trying to solve some of these issues. It's something that you guys have been passionate. We went our separate ways for a long time, right? And now we're back together, and it's something where, I think our passions are to help our community, and so we're willing to answer questions, willing to make sure that we give you guys all the data that you need. And I'm looking forward to using this technology more for my own racing, and hopefully we can answer some more questions as people have them. But I really appreciate your guys' time. This
Yeah,
has
it's been
been
great. Absolutely.
mind-blowing to see, and we look forward to getting your guys' comments. Please let us know if you want to know anything else, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you guys so much.